this is the third installment of walking bass lines. So in this one, it's going to be the same thing, same routine as the other two videos that I did. If you haven't seen the other two, I would watch them because you're missing a lot of context and you're missing how these routines develop and how to really build these bass lines. And more importantly, how to hear these bass lines that you're doing so that you can actually improvise your way through playing tunes using walking bass and improvising these walking bass lines by ear so that it becomes a lot more hip and melodic and you're not just sitting there struggling with memorization and with math. The whole point of this is ear training, not necessarily memorizing a bunch of material. So one thing that I haven't addressed yet in any of the videos so far is what do you do if there's 2 chords per measure and not just 1 chord per measure? So far I've just been doing 4 beats of 1, 4 beats. That's great, but what if there's 2 beats? What if there's something like a 3-6-2-5 in C? So E minor to A7 to D minor to G7 to C. But it's 2 beats, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. There's not enough room to do a 4-note routine. So here are 2 treatments that I like to use for that. I call this the Joe Pass treatment. It's root approach, new root approach, new root approach. And actually, if you listen to Joe Pass and you listen to Joe Pass's version of Autumn Leaves, this is exactly what he does with this walk down. It goes like this. Joe Pass does that all the time. If you want to listen to some other bass players, listen to Ron Carter, listen to Christian McBride, listen to Paul Chambers, listen to guys that you know from around town, whatever. But I'm just going to show you a couple of fixes, and that's one of them. So root, E minor, approach to the A7 by half step from above, down to the A7. Approach to the D minor by half step above, down to the approach note to G, half step above, and then guess what? Half step above into C. So it sounds like this. You can also do it diatonic from above. You can do it diatonic from below. That was actually chromatic from below. Let's try that one more time. Okay, so now you can do it chromatic below. And even though that B is not chromatic, it's diatonic, the point is that it's a half step sound. So it's this. You want to get used to the sound, not necessarily technically whether or not it's diatonic. That's not really the point. Okay, so that's one treatment, and then you can mix them up. So let's do a mix-up. Come up with as many combos as you can. How about and so on. So just like any of these routines, you want to come up with as many examples as you can until they're second nature, and then you want to practice them through various different kinds of chord changes. So the second routine that I have, if you have 2 chords per measure and you're doing, say, a 3-6-2-5, is chord approach. So it doesn't have to be root approach. You can also do chord approach, which opens things up a lot more. So if I want to do chord approach during a 3-6-2-5, I could do something like this. The third of the E minor, approaching the root of A7 by half step from below. So I'm just connecting the third to the root. And then an approach into D, maybe from half step above to get me to the root of D. And then if I want to approach G, I could still approach D by half step below. So be something like that. So the third of E minor connecting to the root of A7. Just a half step walk up. Chromatic walk up. Approach D, half step above. And now I'm going to use D as a pivot tone, so it's the root of D, but it's also the fifth of G7. So I'm going to approach that half step below. So far I got. And so to finish it off, I approached the note G, which is the fifth of C major 7. So the whole thing is. So as you can see, that's just one example, and you can come up with a bunch of different examples, especially once you mix up the chromatic approaches, the diatonic approaches, and because you're not having to land on the root every time, you can land on any of the chord tones. You have a lot of options to play with. So as I mentioned in the previous videos, this is how you practice this. Step 1 is you just want to get the routine down on one chord. Just get used to it. Connecting to the root of another chord, but then stopping there. So for example, or I'm just getting from D minor 7 to G and leaving it at that. And I'm using this routine and I'm coming up with as many examples for this routine as I possibly can. That's step 1. Then you want to run it through a 2-5-1 cycle. Then you want to run it through a 2-5-1 cycle in minor. Then you want to run it through turnarounds. So 1-6-2-5, 2-5-1-6, 3-6-2-5, 2-5-1-6, 2-5-1-5, any of the cycles. Run it through the cycles. So that'll be 4 measures. Then expand that and run it through a 12-bar blues. Then expand that and run it through a simple standard like Autumn Leaves or something like that. You want to do it in all the positions, you want to do it in all the keys, and you want to get that thing down all over the place everywhere. And by doing that, you're going to the gym and you're working out your ears big time. So eventually you want to let all this stuff go. When we're slow motioning this thing and we're just focused and zero it in and we're trying to get a handle on what it is, you want to focus on the math and the formula and looking at your arpeggios and, getting everything kind of worked out and figured out. But once you start running them through the 2-5-1s, then the 12-bar blues, then the changes, and you're running them all over the neck. And if you can do that, if you get to the point where you can run these routines through a standard at a decent tempo, then you've got that routine. Then you can start mixing these routines up. And now you're at the point where you can start to just let this whole thing go. So there is a process. And if you go through that process, you're going to be killing walking bass lines in a couple of months.